That's actually the most important thing to understand about accessibility is that it is an ongoing process.
Hey, I'm Nick Armstrong, and this is the Founded in FoCo podcast. And every episode, we get a chance to talk to somebody who is doing cool and unique things in Fort Collins and our small business community here that we love to celebrate. Today, I am lucky to be here with one of the folks from my origin story, Ron Zasadzinski from Code Geek. Ron, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me, and it's a joy to be here with you today.
Yeah. So I'm so glad our pathways intersected. When I was a newbie entrepreneur, you really, along with Lori Mae Comer and some other entrepreneurs in our that early circle of Ignite Fort Collins, which is a way old throwback. But Ron and crew sort of helped me get my start as an entrepreneur, and I wouldn't be here without you all. So thank you so much, Ron, for everything that you did in the community, first of all, and. I understand that you're doing some amazing things in web design, in particular with accessibility. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as the leader of Code Geek's team of 12 amazing people, I help the team be the best we can be every day. We focus on relationships first, both internally and with our clients, as well as building accessible websites for clients with regional, national, and global reach. And more specifically, we do specialize in custom web design and development and web accessibility services.
How did Code Geek get its start? Like, what was was it, out of a garage? We always hear the garage stories. Tell us what the origin story of Code Geek is.
Yeah, well, I started the company over 20 years ago, and it started out with just me. So I'm also a flight instructor, and I was ready to exit that career as a full-time profession. And I have a very technical background. I've done computer programming throughout my life, since I was a kid, actually. And that seemed like the fastest way back into the technical world. And that was around 1998, 2000, and it was pretty clear that things were heading toward the web at that point, that it wasn't a fad. Time has proved that true. And so, yeah, just started as me, and I did everything, the design and the development and everything, and I'm not a good designer. One or two of those sites are still out there. You can find them if you want. Um, and then we just grew over time. So as I got busier, I brought on a contractor or two, the first one being a designer. And then as we got even busier, started bringing on employees, and we have grown to 12 employees over this time frame, and we have about 150 clients total that we help on a regular basis.
Do you primarily focus on WordPress these days, or what's the core codec that you're working in?
Yeah, as far as the platforms that we work in, we build websites and web applications using WordPress. For simpler websites, we actually use Webflow. And then for web applications, we use Laravel, which is a PHP framework that's quite good for web applications.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about what accessibility means, because I heard you reference it a few times while you're telling us about what Code Geek does and how you do it.
Mhm.
What does it mean to be accessible on the web?
I love this topic. So there are many useful ways to think about web accessibility. One way to explain it is that web accessibility is a large field of action and opportunity to make websites and web content consumable, navigable, and understandable by as many people and technologies as possible. So that's a big overview. May I share an example with you?
Yeah.
And I'm going to loop you in on this example. So let's talk about technologies. So you have a laptop computer of some sort, I imagine, and you use a web browser. Do you use a PC or a Mac? And what is the web browser you prefer to use?
I use a Mac and I use Chrome most of the time.
Awesome. And then you probably have a smartphone. And is that
Yep.
a Apple or Android? And what browser do you prefer on that device?
I'm an Apple guy through and through. So
There you
I use
go.
Chrome and then Safari also.
Right. Okay. Very good. So that's awesome. And then I'm pretty sure you're aware that there are other people visiting your website or the Founded in FoCo website right now who are using different devices and different browsers. Yes.
I hope so.
So yeah. So you hope that you hope that if you had that built by a web development company like us, you would hope that we have tested on all those different platforms so that we're sure that the web works for everyone and not just for you because that's what you like to use, right? So then if we just take that a few steps farther, there are other people right now on the Founded in FoCo website trying to consume it using other technologies that you've probably thought of, but not necessarily everybody has. So some people will use just a keyboard to navigate the website. They may not be able to use a mouse for a temporary or more long-term reason. And if a website is designed for accessibility really well, you can navigate through every navigation menu, interact with every interactive element, and do all the tasks that a person with a full set of tools can use, including like checking out, adding items to a cart, and checking out on a website, commercial e-commerce website. And then for people that have low vision or no vision, they use technology called screen reading software that allows them to not only hear the website read to them, but lets them navigate and interact with it in ways that you and I don't have access to without that software. So as an example, they can request that the site read them a list of the headings on a page, and they can jump to the heading of interest to them, which is really very cool. So what web accessibility is about making the web work for all of those devices, which again are on your web. People are using those tools right now on your website to try to access your website and read the content.
It's a fascinating field because, and early on, I do audio drama as sort of a side hobby. We were at a convention with a group of us together because it's Star Trek audio drama, of course, live long and
Of
prosper.
course.
We and we heard from one of our listeners who was vision impaired, and they told us, here's how to fix your website for me. And we said, awesome, thank you. And that, unless you had that firsthand experience, because this was several years ago, unless you had that firsthand experience, you might not have ever thought about like, oh, well, this and this, these accessibility standards exist. There seems to be a lot more accessibility tools these days, and standards for what that means, because as you know, Wild West in terms of like how CSS and interactive divs and all the rest of this JavaScript and Adobe Flash and all of these great technologies that allowed fun and interactive things, but were definitely not accessible.
Yes, absolutely true.
So do you have a list of resources for folks, or places where you like to point people to say like, these websites are doing it really great, and if they're not doing it really great, then here's where to go?
That's a great question. So I would recommend, as people are trying to learn about accessibility in particular, I would start probably with the W3C. So that's the worldwide, used to be called the World Wide Web Consortium, now they're called W3C, but they're the ones that write the guidelines that are global guidelines for web content accessibility. So that's what we lovingly call WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And that's a good place to start. They have many good resources, and they have a how to learn accessibility starting page, and they have excellent tools from there. And for those who also attend our presentation, we do have an accessibility resource guide that has links to those specific pages, as well as a few other resources that will help. But it's a big field, so I encourage people to get your feet wet and then just take your time. And it's a iterative process to learn more and more and more over time.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like there's a ready checkbox or other thing. Like you can't just do it in one session. You can't sit down and have it done like, here's my list of 5 things to do, right?
No, exactly. Yeah, that is very true. Yeah, it's an ongoing process. And I would
Well,
say that's actually the most important thing to understand about accessibility is that it is an ongoing process. So as an example, if we are building a new website, we are employing accessibility approaches and techniques from the very beginning, from discovery into design into development. And we do testing throughout the development process, also in design. And then once the website is launched, then we are also doing ongoing accessibility auditing testing every month to keep it accessible. So it's not something you just check a box that we've done all the things and then you walk away. So it's a little different that way.
and it seems like the field would be changing over time as well, especially as, new software comes out or other, screen reader developments, AI in particular.
Mhm.
So what's the most difficult thing about web accessibility that you encounter as a developer?
Yes, so the most difficult thing about web accessibility is that it's fuzzy. So most of us, especially if you're a developer, but website or business owners as well, right? We like certainty. We want to make decisions and then it's done. And unfortunately, web accessibility doesn't work that way. I say unfortunately, I shouldn't have used that word because it's more of a feature than a bug, really, to be honest. So why do I say it's fuzzy? Well, so as the website owner, at some points in time, you're going to ask, is my website accessible? So what does that mean? How would we even know? So the current standard is the WCAG 2.2 AA guidelines, and there are 55 success criteria that have to be met. So how do we know that those criteria are met? Well, we're going to use automated tools, which will uncover less than half of the errors. And then we're also going to do manual testing using keyboard and screen reading software to fully test the site. So you have to do all of those things to figure out if it's conformant or not and which guidelines are not yet met. And then say right before launch, the website owner is going to say, is it accessible? Can we launch? And the answer is fuzzy. So let me give you one specific example. So many of us are familiar with alt tags being a good thing to do for images on a web page, right? So are alt tags required for, I should say, alternative descriptions, that text content describing an image, is that required for every image on the page? And the answer is not necessarily. So if you have decorative images, like maybe you have a double rule line, but you're using an image as that separator on the page, or like on our Code Geek website at the bottom, our mascot is Randall the monkey, and we have a little image of him at the bottom, but it does not provide any content, value to the page. It's just a visual nicety. And we don't want a screen reader to read that out loud. It's just that's adding noise to what they're trying to learn. So decorative images like that should not have alt text. So the proper way to do that is you have to have an alt tag, but it's alt equals empty quotes. And many automated tools will pick up that the alt text is missing and flag that as an error or a warning. And then so there's no way an automated tool can know. So it takes knowledge and experience to interpret the results from both automating and keyboard testing and screen reader testing. And what we do before launch or at any point where they would like this assessment is we create a list of the results from the tools we're using, what the tools are that we're using, and then the exceptions that those tools have revealed. And then we review that with the website owner, and we ask them to sign off that, yes, they agree the website is substantially conformant given the information in this report. And that's as close as you can get to having a fully accessible site.
Yeah, and as a business owner, I know that that could be like maybe a nebulous or a scary concept, because when we hear like, oh, it will get close, but it will never get perfect. What we hear is dollar signs, right? And so, what percentage of a website development or redevelopment budget, because they might be different, would you allocate into accessibility standards, and are there benefits to not DIYing this? Because as you said, I think it takes a little bit of specialized knowledge and maybe even some dedicated testing. You said you have specific devices that you utilize that, an average business owner may not have.
Yes, so accessibility does impact three main areas, which are very useful to have this mental framework, which is what we talk about in our presentation in a little more depth. But it impacts design, it impacts development, so the code that we're writing, and it impacts content and how the content is entered and edited in the site. So as a website owner, you're probably managing the content on an ongoing basis. And so that's the area that you need to also, we'll provide training to you and are important for you to learn how to enter that content so it stays accessible when you add a new page or change the content on a page. So that all of those things do take effort that you might not apply if you were not trying to make the website accessible. And we ballpark roughly that it's about 30% of the total effort goes into the accessibility pieces, to do the things correctly. And it
Wow.
is complex. So yeah, if someone is trying to do it on their own, you might start with a platform that is fairly accessible to begin with, like Webflow happens to be more accessible than some of the other do-it-yourself platforms, or get some advice from developers who are very experienced in this. That could also be helpful to point you in the right direction.
So you talked a little bit about how there are visual elements that are maybe extraneous for a user with accessibility needs. What would is there? This is an interesting type of question that's maybe more of a design question, but how do you still incorporate elements of whimsy or fun or other things besides the written content, which they will be interpreted through? How do you still include some of those like visual elements of surprise or intrigue or curiosity for users who have accessibility needs?
Yes, you definitely. Oh, I see. Yes, for people that maybe don't see those things. Yeah, that's a very good question. So it is still useful, for the website to have some of those decorative elements and to have a little bit of animation on certain pieces, or just a little bit of motion, right, to catch your attention. Um, and as far as, yeah, for those with accessibility needs, that's something I need to learn how to do, actually, is how to create a little more of that surprise and whimsy. So uh, I love that I've learned something I can explore further, right? There's no end to all the things to learn in the accessibility journey, that's for sure. And I'd say as a company, we try to be very humble and honest about that. We've been doing web accessibility since 2015, so about 9 years now. And accessibility has been around longer. The last 2 years, we've had our most intensive effort to be producing accessible websites, and we still have more to learn, which is true thing for everybody.
For our fellow web developers out there, beyond coming to your session at Founded in FoCo, well, what do you recommend? Or do you teach classes on this through Code Geek? Should they come and apply for a job and like get their skills like ready to go? Like what's the pathway for learning this?
Yeah, there are other good resources. So for developers, I would recommend checking out the Mozilla Developer Network. So it's MDN, I think .org, but it might be .net. And they have an excellent course for web developers for accessibility. And it's free, it's all online, and it's pretty comprehensive as far as a big picture view and into some of the details. So that's where I would start as a web developer to learn more about this. And again, keep in mind it's an iterative thing. So you'll keep learning more and more and more over time.
What do you see in terms of like, because there's so many different like platforms that are out there.
Mhm.
You mentioned Webflow, the DIY tools for business owners in terms of managing their websites. Are there any that are in particular more apt at the accessibility standards than others?
Mm, that's a great question. Given the tools that we have selected that we use, there's so many of them out there. So it's a little hard to speak to that broader range. But WordPress they work really hard at trying to make things accessible. Of course, as you add plugins, the accessibility of individual plugins that affect the output is all over the map. So that takes, again, a little bit of exploration as the website owner or as a developer to find the plugins that are going to keep it accessible. But WordPress tries very hard to do it. I know there's a big accessibility movement within the Drupal community as well. And then on those do-it-yourself ones, like I mentioned, we have looked at Webflow and we've built websites in Webflow. And for a number of reasons, that one is a little easier to create accessible output than some of the others. So those are the ones that we're most familiar with and that I could speak to.
The thing that we've seen as a trend for a lot of marketing elements is to
Yeah.
have embeddable elements from other websites and things like that. So you might have the medium, right? So these middleware components between you and your content. Are there tools that are out there also that are similar to that are useful or maybe not useful, or best practices in terms of integrating content from a third party website?
Yeah, no, that's a key topic because we have built websites or inherited websites that use, say, Spotify for a music player on certain pages, or playing an audio component. Of course, YouTube is huge for video, and all of those things need to be implemented in particular ways. So most of those tools can be implemented in an accessible way on a website, but they can also be non-accessible. So that's where the testing comes into play. And as an example, on a WordPress website, you may have different plugins that bring that content in, and some may be more accessible than others or have the features that you need. So I don't have like a blanket statement, but you've identified a really important component because that's how the web works now, right? It's nothing is one thing. It's all built on other things that do wonderful things like present video or audio or written content from another platform. So yeah, all of that's doable, but you just need to be doing testing as you go and figure things out ahead of time. Like as an example, we had one client who needed a learning management system. So we did investigate a couple of them and figured out, LearnDash now as an example, they have an online version of LearnDash, and that is fairly accessible. So that could be a good way to go. But it takes some comparison and exploration anytime you're using a new thing.
this is a really important topic, and especially for entrepreneurs, if you've got content out there, you might not know who your user base is, if they have different accessibility needs, and it's always good to have somebody who knows what they're doing, helping with your with whatever the complex task is in your business. And in this case, web accessibility is definitely one to add to your list. Ron, where can we find out more about Code Geek and your wonderful team?
Yeah, our website is codegeek.net. And so that's the place to start. And you can reach us through the website. We've got our phone number and email addresses right there.
Any other words of wisdom or things that you want to share with our audience?
Not specifically. This was wonderful, Nick. I really enjoyed our time together, and thanks for all the questions, and great to see you.
Of course, great to see you too. And for more great interviews with fellow incredible entrepreneurs like Ron, keep listening to the podcast and visit us in person at Founded in FoCo, March 4th through 8th at the Fort Collins Senior Center. Can't wait to see you there. Thanks so much. Hey, thanks for listening. I'm Nick Armstrong, and this is a Founded in FoCo podcast. For more great interviews like this one, join us at foundedinfoco.com.